Hi, everyone. I'm Shaheen from The Content Mix, and I'm excited to be hosting another live edition of our interview series with content marketing experts across Europe. Today, I'm joined by Harriet Patience-Davies, storytelling coach and co-founder at Patience-Davies Consulting. Before starting her own agency last year, she worked in a variety of marketing and media roles and spent 5 years at Accenture, including a year as the UK storytelling coach there. Thanks so much for joining us, Harriet.
Thanks for having me.
So I just want to remind everyone that this is an interactive session and you can bring up your questions and comments anytime. We can bring them up on the screen while we answer them or address your comments. So feel free to comment at any points throughout the live session. It's going to be half an hour, so better if you ask your questions sooner so we have time to get to them. But to get started, I'll start asking the questions. So Harriet, can you tell us about yourself and how you became a specialist in storytelling?
Well, it's a little bit of a strange story. When I was at university, I got the opportunity to take an exchange out to America, and actually I elected to do a course on screenwriting when I was there, which absolutely gave me the screenwriting and the writing bug. I'd always been a kid who wanted to grow up and be an author, but then I realized I wanted to grow up and be a screenwriter. Unfortunately, life was not going to be quite that simple. So when I got back to the UK, I signed up to do a master's in screenwriting, which I loved, but never quite managed to get it off the ground. Because I was living in London at the time, I had to take some temporary jobs. And my first proper job was as a marketing assistant for Hodder Education Publishing in London. And I found that I didn't have to be writing screenplays or novels to be enjoying my work. And so I spent about 5 years doing marketing and moving around in different places. And then I became specialized in being a digital marketer and a digital communicator and eventually a digital product manager. And that took me to Accenture. Now, Accenture occasionally have arguments where they say that we should be bringing 100% of ourselves to work. And I had all of these creative skills that I was keeping purely for my personal life. You know, I wasn't writing novels for the company, obviously. But when Accenture started to focus on getting all of the staff trained up on design thinking about 3 or 4 years ago, my writing skills and my storytelling skills really came to the fore because suddenly it was something which was going to help me and help my clients. In my last year at Accenture, I got the opportunity to take on a role as the UK storytelling coach, working with people across the UK and Ireland and helping them improve their storytelling skills. But when I say storytelling skills, what I mean in a business context is presentation skills, is communication skills. It's sometimes even called executive presence or leadership skills, because these are the skills that we expect our leaders to have. And so while we use the term storytelling, and I happily use the term storytelling because I'm a great fan of it, what it really is it's just about helping people put their best selves forward when they're presenting, talking on stage, talking in meetings, any circumstance where they might need to be speaking in public, really.
Okay, excellent. Well, can you tell us what exactly a storytelling coach does?
So what we do at Patience-Davies Consulting is that we offer storytelling training. We have 2 courses, Introduction to Storytelling and Storytelling for Business. Both of these courses explain what a story is, how to tell a story, when to tell a story. We have sections on delivery techniques, whether you should be using props, do you need PowerPoint, how do you use your voice, how do you use your body language, lots and lots of stuff. In addition to that, we also run monthly webinars where we deep dive into specific topics. Areas we've done so far: how to overcome stage fright, how to use your voice, virtual presentation skills, when we did a whole section on how you want to have good light and good audio and make sure what's in the background is appropriate for work. But my favorite part of what we do is the opportunity to work with people on a one-on-one basis to help them work towards a particular goal. So sometimes people come to us because they've got a conference speech coming up, or because maybe they want to do a TED talk, or they're supposed to be presenting at some point and they are nervous. And so we help them refine their content, we help them practice, we give them feedback, and we really help them develop their skills. And it's absolutely wonderful watching people who generally have quite high anxiety about speaking, about talking and presenting themselves, really build that confidence and become brilliant speakers on stage. It's just so much fun.
Very cool. So what mistakes do you see people make when it comes to storytelling?
Everybody talks too fast. everybody talks too fast. People become enthusiastic and they talk too fast and they start waving their arms about, and it can be very difficult because the speed at which we should be talking, and I'm even talking a little bit too fast now, so let me try and do that again. The speed at which we should be talking should always feel a little bit slower than you're actually comfortable. And so one of the first tips I give to anybody when they're going to be speaking is, if you know what you're going to say, slow down. We as human beings, we like to take information in at quite a slow pace. And if we're talking too quickly, our audience might be thinking about point 1 when we're already talking about point 3, which means that they've entirely missed point 2 and are probably not going to understand point 3 very well either, because they're still thinking about point 1 because we're talking too fast. So that's my first piece of advice for anybody, is slow down.
Yeah, I really struggle with that, not only on the podcast, but even worse when it comes to public speaking, because obviously the nerves come in, and when you're in front of people. Any tips on like how to actually do that? If you're the kind of person whose nervous habit is to just speed up your speech, and maybe your brain is faster than, yeah.
Oh, believe me, Shaheen, I'm entirely with you. And I get there myself. I become enthusiastic and suddenly I'm talking faster than a cartoon character. One of the ways to really slow yourself down is to really focus on your breathing. So if you're taking deep breaths and you're sitting with your shoulders back for a virtual call, of course, I mean, you might want to be standing up if you're actually physically in the room with people. But for a virtual call, you want to be sitting with your shoulders back and you want to be able to take in full, deep breaths, fill up those lungs with oxygen. So if you're breathing slowly, it automatically makes you speak more slowly. Because when you're breathing quickly, you start speaking more quickly. So if you do feel that you are speaking too quickly, just pause, take a breath, and then keep going.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll have to give it a try. So would you say, is there a set structure for good storytelling?
I actually teach a structure which I call the 4 cons structure, which if you listen to what the 4 cons are, you may notice that one of them is in fact a com, but it makes it slightly less easy to remember if it's the 3 cons and the 1 com. So the 4 cons structure works on the basis of context, complication, consequence. So when you're telling a story in a work-based context, when you're telling a story in a meeting or to a colleague or to a client, this is not going to be a big, long story. This is not going to be Lord of the Rings. This is not going to be War and Peace. It's important to be able to get to the point of your story quickly, because most people won't listen to you for more than about 90 seconds. So I use the structure context, complication, consequence. Context, where are we at the beginning of the story? Who's our main character? What's going on? So, for example, the context might be, oh, I'm telling you a story about my first job. I was 19 years old and working in a chippy. That's a really clear context. You know that the main character is me. You know the main character is me when I was younger, and I've given you a physical location of where I was working that you may be able to picture. Then I'm going to tell you about the complication. I was 19 years old and I was working in a chippy, and I did not like that job. Every day that I was there and I would leave, I was just, there was so much grease on my skin. I hated it so much. But then what's the consequence? What happened as a result of this complication? As a result of this complication, I basically resigned from that job. I quit that job, but not before actually developing massive eczema all over my face and having to deal with it. It's not actually the best story to be telling in this particular context, but it does actually break it down into context, complication, consequence. And the reason why you tell that story is the conclusion. What is the lesson you want to learn? The lesson I want to learn is that I never will work in a chippy again. I never want to be working in a job in an environment where I'm physically uncomfortable. Now, obviously, when you're telling a story in a work context, when you're telling a story in a meeting, trying to win somebody over with your argument, you want to start with the conclusion. What's the lesson and the moral that you want your audience to take from this? Then find a story that has that conclusion. So if the story is about how you work really hard, what's the story about you working really hard? And it can be a personal story. Could it be a story about you running a marathon, or a story about you climbing a mountain? Is it a story about you working all weekend and delivering something on time? If the conclusion you want the audience, your audience or your listeners to draw is that you have a lot of experience in this area and they can trust you, what's a story you can tell that shows that you have a lot of experience in this area and they can trust you? Is it in this job? Is it your last project? What can you draw upon? So if you start with the conclusion, you can then find a story from your personal experience that backs up that conclusion. So context, complication, consequence, all wrapped in the conclusion, which is the real message that you want your audience to hear.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, those are great tips. And yeah, it's so important when you only have such a short time to speak in, like you said, to be organized, right, in the way that you tell your story. I wanted to just remind those who are watching live that you can, that if you've just joined now and you maybe didn't hear me before, that this is an interactive session. So if you leave any comments or questions in the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, I can bring those up on the screen and we can answer them. But meanwhile, I'll keep asking questions. So I saw you had said that great storytellers aren't always born, but can be made. What tips would you give for those striving to become great storytellers and public speakers?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that there's an assumption we all have that if somebody is good at storytelling, they are just a good storyteller. Maybe they're really charismatic or they've been telling stories since they were able to speak. And really, being a good storyteller is all about technique. It's all about being able to tell your stories in a way that the audience find engaging. It's all about being able to use your voice to tell your stories so that people can hear them and people can understand you. And it's about demonstrating confident body language that shows you and shows the message and the meaning that you want to put across. All of those things, structuring your content, using your voice and mastering your body language, all of those things are just practical techniques that anybody can learn. I have worked with people who've had incredible amounts of anxiety, and you just have to find the techniques that work for you, work for that individual, because not everybody's going to benefit from exactly the same approach. But a lot of people will be able to improve their storytelling by speaking slower, mastering their breathing, mastering eye contact to make sure they're looking at their audience, and making sure the content they tell is well structured and really sensible and clear for the audience so they understand it. Because that's the point, right? We want our audience to understand us.
Absolutely. And so how do you help your clients find their unique voice?
One of my pieces of advice that I often give to people is I ask if they have kids or if they have nieces or nephews or little brothers or sisters. Do they have small children in their life anywhere? A lot of people seem to have developed this kind of work persona, which is generally a bit less charismatic, a bit less fun to listen to than their home persona. So one of the bits of homework that I often give people I'm coaching is, do you have the opportunity to go and read a child a bedtime story? And really read that bedtime story, get into it, do the voices, build the dramatic pauses, and kind of have some real fun in telling a bedtime story. Julia Donaldson books are brilliant for this. A.A. Milne, all of the rhyming. You can have some real fun with your voice when you're rhyming. And then come back to the speech that you want to do. Hopefully after the child is in bed. Don't read the Gruffalo and then read them 10 reasons to buy my product. That won't work. But come back to the speech that you want to deliver and then try and deliver it in the same way as you spoke to that child, as you read that story to that child. And you'll find that you're a lot more animated and a lot more engaging, and your voice is just a lot better able to deliver the message.
So we have a couple of questions here.
Oh, brilliant.
So, well, first of all, Mar asks, is there a great storyteller who inspires you?
Oh, well, I will admit I have a few. In terms of writers that I love, I'm a big fan of Neil Gaiman, who of course has written comic books and novels and TV shows and films. And so, that he is a very versatile writer, and he's very well established. And he did a brilliant speech a few years ago called the Make Good Art speech, which is all about how we need to embrace our passions and make sure that we're doing something that we like. Even if maybe it's not what's paying the bills, we should still have something in our life which enables our creativity. So Gotta love Neil Gaiman for that. But in terms of a business storyteller, Adam Grant. Adam Grant, who has a podcast, Work Life, and his books, Think Again, and I think it's Plan B. He's one of these guys who manages to talk about topics which, they don't sound like they would be that interesting. And yet he always is able to find engaging stories, engaging interviewers. Adam Grant is a brilliant business storyteller.
Yeah, those are great ones. Thanks for sharing. And let's see, the other question we have is from Daphne asking, would you recommend taking acting, improv classes, or some sort of performance training to help become a better speaker or storyteller?
Absolutely, because there are so many hints and tips that come from actors and from broadcast journalists that you get out of courses like that. I mean, you can come to one of my courses and they'll be full of hints and tips, but especially if you have the opportunity to do, well, when COVID is over, if you have the opportunity to do a class face-to-face in your local area, improv classes, acting classes, these can be really good at helping you build your confidence, build an understanding of body language on stage, because so many people are just so nervous about things like, where do I put my hands? If I'm talking on stage, where do I put my hands? Do I put them in my pockets? Do I wrap them across my front? Should I have one in the air? What's going on? And you get so focused on things like, where do I put my hands, that you forget about delivering your message and delivering your speech. So going to classes can really, really help with that.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Well, we have a few more questions from the audience, but I wanted to make sure we just have time that I wanted to ask you for some of your resources for those who want to become better storytellers.
So in terms of content creation, there is a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And it's a really interesting little book, which is all about how stories become sticky and using stories to deliver messages. And it's got some great examples and exercises and studies in it that they did. So Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath is a great book that everybody should read. Now, in terms of more practical things, like how should I stand on stage? How should I talk? The book by the TED CEO, I've just forgotten his name, but the book by the TED
Chris
CEO.
Anderson, no?
Chris Anderson.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris Anderson TED Talks. I've got it on the shelf right there.
I've actually read that one. It's really good.
Really, lots of practical advice in that. I really like that. And Carmine Gallo's Talk Like TED. Now, you might think, I don't really need to learn from TED Talks. I'm never going to be standing on an auditorium stage talking about genetics for 18 minutes. But TED Talks are a really great way of seeing how presentation techniques, like other people using presentation techniques, and seeing how well they can do it. So there's an awful lot that we can learn from TED. I'm a big fan of TED.
Yeah, absolutely. I read that the official one, the TED Talks book from Chris Anderson, and in preparation for a talk that I had to give, and it definitely made me think about it. Really focused more on the storytelling aspect than on the actual like presentation tips. I would say it was really about having something to say, right?
Yes, he did a lot about the structure in there and kind of pulling it all together. I mean, you can also come and follow me over on patience-davies.com, and we publish a weekly blog with lots of articles with advice and practical tips and guidance. So, you can always come get some stuff directly from me if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Let's see. Okay, what other questions did we not answer yet? Let's see. From Kyler, are there any companies that do a great job at storytelling that you follow or recommend?
I'm actually really loving Tony's Chocolonely at the moment. I don't follow too many companies on LinkedIn. I tend to follow companies on LinkedIn that I would like to work for. So there's past aspirations and dreams and different companies you'd want to see. But I was really impressed with Tony's Chocolonely recently. And they do slavery-free chocolate. It's very tasty. It's not cheap, but it's very tasty. And I'm a big fan of their chocolate. And they had
from the Netherlands, no?
It is. Yeah. It's from the Netherlands.
A friend brought me some once.
A friend of mine introduced me to it when I was visiting Amsterdam a couple of years ago. And then luckily about 3 months later, they started selling it in the UK. So I was very happy.
Nice.
But they had a recent circumstance where they are trying to ensure that all of their chocolate supplies, everything in their supply chain is slavery free. And by doing this, they're actually working with a lot of the established growers and trying to force basically better behavior on some of the established supply chain for chocolate. So they're doing it in a way which is not just impacting their chocolate, but is potentially impacting other companies' chocolate. And the story they told around that was so well done. If you follow Tony's Chocolonely on LinkedIn, they've got some great stuff. And so I do think they do a really good job with storytelling and with explaining things that are not necessarily, there's some complicated things there about supply chains and local politics and child labor and stuff that we all should know, but it's quite complicated. And they always manage to explain it in a really simple way. I'm really impressed with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example. And then and someone was asking, this anonymous user, wanted to know, do you practice in the mirror or record yourself to see if you're being expressive enough? I guess is the question. Then there's a comment about what you previously said about bedtime stories.
I do both. Mm-hmm. So if I've got something coming up, I will be practicing in the mirror, and I will be practicing when I've set up a phone or camera to record me. Because when I'm practicing in the mirror, I'm never really seeing myself in the same way an audience sees me. Mm-hmm. I'm still hearing my own voice inside my head rather than hearing it over the speakers. So practicing in the mirror can sometimes encourage me to speed up because I understand it. So obviously everybody will. And as I've said, slowing down is a key skill. What's really interesting is a storytelling coach I know out of the States, a chap called Robin Dunn, he advised me once that there are two places that everybody should practice a speech when they've got it coming up. You should practice somewhere where you feel vulnerable and somewhere where you feel powerful. And so if you can give your speech somewhere where you feel vulnerable and somewhere where you feel powerful, you can do it for all of the different levels of emotion in between these two things. So he recommended practicing your speech in the shower when you're naked, when there's no mirror, when there's no PowerPoint slides. And if you can do your speech in the shower, then, you can do your speech on stage. And the other place he recommended practicing to do a speech was when driving. But I personally don't drive. So driving for me is not a powerful, and it's not a powerful activity at all. But cooking and baking sometimes is. When I'm baking and everything is going well and, the dough is rising, it's all, before it might actually go terribly wrong. But I generally feel quite powerful when things are going well, when I'm cooking or when I'm baking. So practicing then can really help as well. Mm-hmm. So yes, you should definitely record yourself and then practice in all of these different places and record yourself afterwards and see what the difference is that it makes. Mm-hmm. There is such a thing as being too expressive, but you have to be very expressive to be too expressive.
Yeah, I see. I had a question about just sometimes maybe if you've been asked to give a talk somewhere and then you have to choose the topic, do you have any advice for just choosing a topic with a hook that's really going to get people's interest? How do you come up with something really unique?
So I would want to have done the research. If I'm not talking about storytelling, and I'm often not talking about storytelling, what I like to look for is a killer statistic. Mm-hmm. Because when you are doing a short speech, you want something which gets the audience's attention. And a killer statistic from the start is a way of really grabbing your audience's attention. There is a TED talk that Jamie Oliver, the chef, did. Mm-hmm. And he stood on stage and he said at TED, "In the next 18 minutes while we have our chat, 4 Americans who are alive will be dead because of the food that they eat." Mm-hmm. And wham, that is a killer stat. That is something that's going to make me sit up and go, they're going to be dead? 4 people are going to be dead? And so having, ideally not always that people will be dying while you're doing a speech, but having a killer stat that really gets the audience's attention, I find that sometimes pulls me in the direction of the speech I'm going to give, the story I'm going to tell. Especially when you're at a conference and it might already have a theme and you want to make sure that your presentation ties into the theme. You want to find the area there that you feel the most passionate about. And then do the research and look for that killer stat, because your passion and a passionate delivery is really engaging to an audience, and a killer stat will get their attention from the start. And there are other hooks you can use. It doesn't just have to be a killer stat, but if you can find the killer stat, that's really good.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, well, we had a couple of other questions. Let me go to this one, just like if any no-nos or things to watch out for. Yeah.
I would advise not lying it's a big one for me. Not lying. Exaggerating is fine. Editing the story that you're telling to leave out in details that aren't important, also fine. Actively lying, ooh, you can get caught. And if there is somebody in the audience that knows that you're lying, you have just lost all credibility with them.
Absolutely.
And people around
that happens very often, you think?
I think that sometimes people like to massage truth in a way to make it more palatable, and it can be really tempting to just make up a story. But if you're going to make up a story and do something entirely fictional, then credit it as such. I was wondering, what would happen if we did this? It occurred to me that I've never heard a story about such and such. So let's tell a story about such and such. So own that it's not factual. Own that it's not real. Acknowledge that it's not real, and you can still tell that story. You can still tell an aspirational story. In 5 years' time, you've walked into your new office and it's just been built and it's a completely green building. What's the first thing you notice? Oh, what's the first thing I notice about my new green office? And it gets you thinking. That's not a lie. That's a thought experiment. But kind of saying here, oh, well, there was that time when I was fighting in World War I in trench warfare, and everyone's like, but you are clearly not 120, so that's not true. And you just lose your audience. So I would avoid lying if at all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great tip. We have this question from Jill Vess. Do you have tips for talking about a subject you're not quite a master of?
Well, my first tip for that would be to find a master on that subject to brief you before you go to talk about it as much as possible. If it's a subject that you really are genuinely not a master of, but you have to present on, perhaps you're representing a more technical team in a meeting, then again, you can own the fact that I am here talking about this technical team, but the real experts, they sit over there. And if you guys have technical questions, if I can't answer them straight away, I'm going to have to come back to you. So a little bit of authenticity and a little bit of vulnerability there, saying I'm acknowledging that I'm not a master of this, but I am potentially intermediate. So there are some things I can answer you on, but there are some things where I'm going to have to go and get the actual expert. So yeah. That isn't to say that you should disparage or put yourself down. Interestingly, self-deprecating jokes work better for men than for women. Surveys of audiences, when a male speaker gives a self-deprecating joke, it is seen as them being relatable and easy to get on with and funny. When a female speaker makes a self-deprecating joke, it is not always seen so positively. So be wary of standing up there and going, I'm giving a speech, but I know nothing about this. Don't do that. Say, I am going to give this speech. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. There may be some I have to refer back to my team, is a slightly nicer way of acknowledging that you're not necessarily the most knowledgeable person on the subject.
Right. Yeah. Being honest, but also
within reason.
Not questioning yourself either. Yeah. Not creating doubt. Well, so we're reaching the end of the interview. So I just wanted to ask if you have any final takeaways or parting advice for our audience.
One of the things I would say is, even though we are a year into everybody working from home right now, there's still an awful lot of people I see who are presenting on camera with a window directly behind them, and they're like a silhouette and you can't make any details out of their face, or they're presenting on camera and in fact their webcam is here, but the screen is over here. So all you're doing is seeing the side of their face, which is not particularly engaging. At this point in this lockdown, we all should have definitely made sure that we have good lighting, that our webcams are at eye height, that people can hear us. And honestly, the gear to do this, if you don't already have it, is remarkably cheap. My laptop right now is sitting on top of 8 cookbooks. You don't need to buy an expensive riser. You can just go raid your cookbooks or your encyclopedias from a shelf. I have a ring light which costs £30, and my microphone costs a little bit more than that, but you can get a good gaming microphone for about £30 or £40, 40 or 50 euros. So if you have the ability to invest in the kit that will make sure that you are actually doing virtual presentations as well as you can, then I really would recommend that you do. That's a big plus for me, is being able to see people's faces and engage with them properly over the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great tips. And for those who'd like to get in touch with you or learn more about Patience-Davies Consulting, what's the best way?
Absolutely. You can come to www.patience-davies, that's PATIENCEDAVIES.com. Or if you can find me on LinkedIn, it's a pretty distinctive name. I am the only Harriet Patience-Davies on there. Come find me and you can find all of my resources from there as well.
Great. Yeah, we'll go ahead and put the website in the comments. I think I got it right. I'll stick that in. And yeah, and then of course we will be writing up a summary of this interview afterwards with all the links as well, so you can all find it there soon when we publish on our podcast. Well, thank you so much, Harriet, for taking the time to join us on this live Q&A.
This has been lots of fun. Thanks for having me, Shaheen.
Yeah, it's been great learning from you today and learning about how we can all improve our storytelling techniques. So I just wanted to also say thank you to everyone who has participated and listened in. For more perspectives on content marketing in Europe, make sure to tune into our podcast where we publish a lot of these kinds of interviews, and also keep tuning in. As you probably noticed, for those of you in our Facebook group and following us on YouTube, we're doing more and more live interviews as well. So keep looking out for those. And we'll be repurposing parts of this interview for the podcast, so make sure to watch out for that, along with the blog post with takeaways from the conversation. And thanks again so much to everyone, and especially those who asked some very nice questions during the interview. And thanks again to Harriet for sharing your insights and advice. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.